welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and excuse my voice. I'd love to welcome this esteemed panel here and to discuss the very important topic of both mental and physical wellness, particularly for many of you, understanding what that means and building healthy environments, particularly around a learning environment from ages, I think we said pre-K to gray was the session headline. I'm going to spend some time diving in deep into this diverse set of backgrounds here that we have. And then I will lead a few questions, but I would love to leave some ample time for Q&A and questions. We really want to make this as engaging and conversational as possible. I know you all have our detailed bios, so I just want to start off with some very quick intros, maybe your name, your organization, and what brings you to your work. And I can kick it off quickly. My name is Wayee. I'm a general partner at Reach Capital. We're an early stage venture fund focused on education technology startups. This topic is very professionally and personally dear to my heart and of growing importance given the rising mental, developmental, and behavioral challenges we face with our students today. And personally, I've spent the last decade supporting my own children around specifically ADHD and dyslexia, and have had, really a window open in terms of the resources, time, energy it takes to support. I have two children. I think about 99% of all other children who, don't have access to that support. So I'm very motivated about the topic today. But why don't we kick it off, Tal?
Great. My name is Ben-Shahar. I'm the co-founder of the Happiness Studies Academy. And what drives me is when I look around and see well-being levels, broadly speaking, happiness levels, in our teens and older, it's not looking great. And the question is how to leverage technology to help increase levels of well-being, much needed in schools, in communities.
Thank you.
Great. I'm Casey Estenson. I'm the CEO of a company called Go. We bring movement and mindfulness videos into the classroom and into the home for kids kind of in the K to 6 range, 4 to 11-year-olds. And as Tal said, in general, we think that by the time you figure out that you're not well or happy, it's too late. So we're trying to help little kids establish the behaviors and patterns in their lives early to have the habits that are necessary to be hopefully grounded, healthy, happy human beings when they become adults.
Similarly, my name is Neuner, CEO of Powered Education, and we're leading training of health coaches and functional nutrition practitioners. And what brought me into this is my own relationship to anxiety and how useful personal growth and habit change was to my own well-being, and wanting to see that amplified in the world.
Hey guys, my name is Boaz. I'm a CEO and co-founder of a company called Wisdo. We're a self-care platform that connects people who've been through similar life experiences so they can reduce loneliness, increase happiness, and help others. This is a platform that, contrary to all other social networks, ranks for helpfulness. We rate members in the community by how helpful they are to other people. One of the first things that we did when we launched the platform was to remove the like button. We do not have a like button. We have a helpful button. We also have a been there button. And since we launched the platform, we've seen loneliness reduced by 70% during the first 2 weeks of using the platform. What brought me to Wisdo is a personal experience. Like many entrepreneurs, I was a journalist for many years. I was an investigative reporter for most of my professional career until my father, who was the president of the Israel Cancer Association, got diagnosed with cancer 2 years into his term. Unfortunately, passed away 8 years after that. And the irony between, on the one hand, having access to the best doctors and best hospitals and best knowledge, but at the same time making hundreds of mistakes because we lacked wisdom, which is experience-based, timely, and empathy-driven, was something that I found very difficult. Came out of that experience, decided to do something about it, and that's how Wisdo came to be. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So I thought I'd anchor the conversation around starting with the science, and while we could go really deep into the neuroscience of everyone's work, I'd love if you could help lay the groundwork on how physical exercise and how mental wellness practices support the brain and body.
So maybe I can start, and just to point out, the difference today in this field of education, neuroscience, technology, the difference between today and even 20 years ago is today we can do the science. We know much better what works and what doesn't, and many of the things that we thought worked actually don't, and other new things are working. So, for example, two areas where interventions meet science are meditation and physical exercise. So we know the research on meditation, which is remarkable, on yoga. Perhaps the most powerful intervention contributes to physical health, contributes to mental health. When it comes to physical exercise, I'll just share with you a little bit. Regular physical exercise actually changes the way our brain functions. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. These are feel-good chemicals in the brain. Works in the exact same way as the best psychiatric medication. So what we know today is that if kids were exercising more, if adults were exercising more, a large number of them would not need medication. Some still would. Medication has a very important place in our societal well-being. However, physical exercise works in a very similar way. It actually rebuilds the brain. There is research on neuroplasticity, which is how the brain is malleable, and neurogenesis, which is how new neurons are formed as a result of physical exercise. Meditation, very similar impact. If you do both, even better.
Erica, Boaz, do you want to chime in there on the?
We're more about mental wellness than physical wellness, but I think what's been interesting for us, just to give you an idea, since we launched about 14 months ago, 17 million life events were submitted by people who are going through different experiences, with the payoff being finding someone who's been there. And what's been interesting from a data point of view, and it corresponds with what Tal said, is that if the experiences that people go through, and we're talking about specifically people who are between the ages of 18 to 25, are around mental health, so depression, anxiety, loneliness, heartbreak, the experiences that they're looking at to get out of that experience and looking for some wisdom and guidance around physical health, so getting increasing fitness, increasing sleep, and the third one is building self-esteem. So for us, it's been really interesting to see the connections between the root causes and what people identify as solutions.
And if I could just add, the thing about the science is that we know so much now, but how do we actually do it? And so it's been most effective for me personally has been working with a personal trainer and health coach multiple times every week from my bedroom. And it's 3 times a week, a half hour, and I'm able to squeeze it into my day. So,
Great. I think that's a great segue. Casey, if you could talk a little bit about setting the stage for the state of K-12, the K-12 landscape, and where physical education has fallen off, and what is driving the work at Go Noodle.
So in the United States, we're facing the least active generation ever. A little bit of what Tal mentioned in his speech of making real human connections and the power of screens, the endorphin rush that comes off of using screens. And as I say, parents just want to get a shower, get dinner on the table. You see it all the time everywhere you go, in restaurants and in public settings, that kids are just locked onto screens. So Go Noodle, we've been at this for maybe 4 or 5 years now. We just decided that those devices could be used as a weapon for good. That there is a difference between passive screen time, vegging out in front of the screen, and active screen time. So we purposely create content and games that encourage kids to get moving. And we have partnered with many healthcare organizations across the country, and we now know statistically that not only do test scores go up when kids move, and I'm not talking about like 60 minutes of movement. I'm talking about taking 5 minutes, 3 to 7 minutes in short bursts of getting up from your desk and doing some stretching or some mild exercising can help you increase not only test scores, but reading comprehension, and gets you more grounded to interact not only with the material, but your classmates. So without all the complicated language, which Tal's a professional and I'm just an amateur, we know this as an adult. If you're busy, if you're stressed, if you are finding yourself to be unfocused or having a hard time gaining focus, getting up and going for a walk, doing a stretch, even going and having a conversation with a coworker or a family member can help bring you back to center and get you refocused on the task at hand.
If I can just add to this, so this is so important. That more and more doctors today are talking about sitting as the new smoking. And don't worry, you're fine.
Everyone stand up.
However, if we sit for the 8 hours a day, or kids sit for 5 hours a day, that's not good. So, and getting up every 20, 30 minutes for that, even 20 seconds of just moving around, or if you have 3 minutes, even better. What a difference that can make. And research just came out of Cambridge University in England, showing that not just physically we're better off when we move, but also psychologically we're much more likely to be happy if we move around regularly. So again, Boaz, to your point, it's the mind-body connection. They affect one another, they interact.
Great, no, thank you. I want to segue more, Tal, to your ideas around happiness and success, which you've discussed and somewhat redefined. And following on this question, I would love to get other perspectives on what you're seeing in terms of just the culture of expectation setting we've set, whether in the workplace, as we've seen play out in college admissions and K-12. So if you can maybe talk a bit about how you define both, and if people could build on that based on what they're seeing in your own learning settings.
Sure. So there's a common misconception today that among parents, teachers, and generally in our society, certainly in the developed and the developing world, that success leads to happiness. You increase success levels, if they get into a top school, if they do well financially, then they'll be happy. It's simply not true. In fact, you look at high school, this is correlational. However, in high school, there is a strong correlation between grades and unhappiness. And part of the reason is because many of these students who are very successful live with the expectation that getting that A or getting into Stanford, this is what will make them happy. And it won't. It's an illusion. And once they face this illusion, then they feel despondent and hopeless. The difference between depression and sadness is that depression is sadness without hope. Now, if I'm sad and unhappy, but I still have the hope that when I get into a top college, then I'll be happy, then I'm sad. But if I get there and then I'm still not happy, then I'm hopeless, and then I become depressed. And that's why we see such high levels of depression. We have to change this understanding around. It's not success that leads to happiness. Increase levels of well-being, and you get more success. You actually do better in school. We have the cause and effect wrong.
Can I just add, this is absolutely fascinating, but from our point of view, the question is, or has been, what do our users identify as success? And we're looking at several generations who define success as being liked by other people. It's less about getting into school, it's less about making a lot of money, it's more about just having someone click like or follow. And once they don't get that, that's when they spiral into, loneliness, depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And then for us, the big question was, how do we redefine success? How do we create a platform that prioritizes on something else than popularity? And I think we've done some of it to a large extent with some of the stuff that I mentioned, removing the like, matching people with others who are similar to them. But if I have to summarize it all to one psychological driver, it's having a meaningful connection with someone out there that would not judge you by your appearance or by your weight or by how many friends you have, but rather would understand what you're going through. And we're software guys, so we define things by data and conversion. So we have this reaction called been there. You write something on the platform, someone clicks been there, and that sends a push to that person. 31% of people who get that push go back to the product, look at that person's profile, and start a meaningful conversation.
Wow.
And we're working against billions of experiences, which are billions of users, who are educated on this concept that a success in life is just having a big following on Instagram.
Yeah.
If I could just add, our core human needs are love, safety, and belonging. So whatever we see out in the world, every expression is essentially some manifestation of wanting love, safety, and belonging. So our challenge is that we've been so externally referenced that there's actually no listening to what's true for our body. It's like we're taught to override our body, not listen to our body. And that's actually what happens with chronic diseases. Our body actually says no more, and now we're taking over, right? So if we can listen to our bodies earlier in the process, and that's more listening for our own truth and not the external validation from the whole world, that's how we have true, I believe that's the measure of success for me.
So Boaz, you discussed some of the intergenerational questions I have around, the millennial Gen Z digital native who grew up on likes. I wonder if you could all comment on the demographic you're serving and how you think about different behavioral changes, different ways in which these generations think about mental health, and more generally, arguably the stigma of mental health in pop culture, for better or for worse, seems to be decreasing. But I would love your perspective on the different demographics you serve and support by age.
Should I start? Or
Yeah, you start.
Okay. We launched the platform without a demographic in mind. And what came back is the 18 to 25 age group, and then the second tier is 25 to 34. That was one big, aha moment for us, because we didn't necessarily aim for that population, and the second thing that we didn't expect is to find out how lonely these guys are. The experiences that they are going through and around which they're looking for someone who's been there are by far in the mental health space. Depression is the biggest community, anxiety, loneliness, heartbreak, bipolar disorder, being bullied, all of that. And then the second set of experiences are relationship related. So I think that was one surprise. The second surprise are the type of experiences that they go through, and for many of them, and they write this to us, and they write it on the App Store. This is the first time that they've had a meaningful exchange with someone online, ever. And they're shocked. And we're old enough to remember forums and stuff like that. They don't know all of that. Right. What they know is, being liked or being followed or being, and that's the worst of all, unfollowed. Yeah. So, that was the second kind of aha moment for us. I think what's been also fascinating, and I would love to spend some time with Tal talking about it, is we create a progression where you come in as a user where you're looking to find help for someone who's been there, and the more you help other people, the more you rise on the platform. So you come in as a user, you become a helper, you earn a helper badge, then you become a guide, and then you become a super guide, and that's all reflected to other people. What's been really interesting is to look at that cohort. Who are those guys who, come to the platform, come in through a specific experience, but quickly convert to being helpers to other people, and what happens to them? I can say a couple or three maybe interesting insights. One is that their well-being improves considerably, dramatically. When they get the helper badge or they get the guide badge, they feel that their life has been divided into before getting that badge and after getting that badge. And again, that badge it's not just a badge. It's not a gamifying, whatever online game. This is them earning that by helping others. The second thing that we've seen, and it's a question that I had for all of you guys, is the distribution of genders. By far, females or people who identify as women are the helpers. They are the guides. I don't know what's going on in the social condition of the gender that I am part of, but something gets lost along the way. Males do not help as much, and we're talking about like 80-90%. The difference rates.
Wow.
The third thing that has been interesting is to see geographies. So some cultures are more helpful than others. I don't know if there are people from New Zealand in the room, but you guys are awesome.
Wow.
And the combinations are also interesting. So we found that, maybe, I'll just finish with that because I can go on. But there's a whole AI play of how do we match people with other people to create a meaningful conversation. And the one biggest factor is if the first experience that they've uploaded to their profile as they went into Wisdo is the same one, then the chances that they'll have a meaningful conversation, deep, long, recurring, helpful, quadruples. So it seems that the shortcut into having a meaningful relationship is having a shared bond. We always knew that, but we see that now in an online platform.
Right. No, thank you. And maybe we can hear more in the K-12 context of younger learners and how you're approaching both the physical and mindfulness.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to hear everyone on this panel talk about this because if you think about the schooling system, these things are largely not taught, like just straight out not taught. Mm-hmm. Not only are they not taught, in fact, in many schools or many public institutions, they're condemned because of the pressure to standardized test our way into the, a military industrialized educational system in which, this country has had a very hard time breaking out of. And I don't mean to be the downer on this, but a lot of you live in this world. Add to that the fact that many of these families are under intense stress and pressure, emotional stress and pressure, economic stress and pressure, and are detaching at a higher rate from the institutions for which these things were often taught. Formalized religion, community gatherings. Technology is it's connecting us and taking us away all in the same breath. And so, to your question of who we market to, all of our stuff is for the kids, but boy, are we on a journey to try to help the adults who care for the kids. Mm-hmm. And if you can't create the conditions of an adult, a teacher is somebody who has a vocation at their best to give their lives to children. And oftentimes that is sacred ground. And even they need help. It's, you can be a parent just by having a kid. You don't have to have a license, you don't have to have any sort of credentialing. That's a different discussion. So, you're just figuring it out. Like you had your children and you were just figuring it out as a parent. And so and you're lucky through the resources and the achievement you've had as a human being in your life to know enough to be able to convey that to your children. And the thing Tal talked about around the dinner table, that's a simple practice and high-minded practice all in the same moment. And so we're just trying to come at this through the lowest common denominator of media that looks entertaining, but underneath it is grounded in many of these principles so that parents, teachers, adults who care for kids, and the kids themselves can all have some fun together. When they're having fun together, it's the entry point for which to do some other good in the world.
Great, thank you. I have many more questions, but I'm looking at the time and I would love to open it up for any audience questions for the panelists. Please.
May I ask two? If the first one takes too long, then we can skip the second one. For Casey and Tal, you guys were both talking about it. I'm curious about how, if you've seen research.
If you've seen hard evidence, or if you know of any already, that suggests the importance of turning success leads to happiness around, and specifically to traditional success metrics, so like SATs and stuff like that. Because I think that one of the challenges I see is that when you market to parents, they have philosophies of life that are not in alignment with the platform that you're providing, for instance. So how do you market and persuade parents with data or something to suggest that health, relationships, emotional fitness come first? Long question.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
Do you want to go first?
I'll do it in as quickly as I can. So GoNoodle takes underwriting money, a little bit like NPR. We take underwriting money from the healthcare institutions and corporations that have a vested interest in the health of their communities. Many of those organizations want a quantitative return on their community investment. And so we put PhDs into the field to A/B test classrooms that have in our case, have GoNoodle, and ones that don't. Ones that are putting movement into their day, and ones that are not. And to a classroom, I've now had two PhD candidates do their dissertations on this subject. Those classrooms that put movement or mindfulness breaks consistently and regularly throughout their day, just in small bursts, in a purposeful way, see higher results. For us, the mathematics scores, the testing scores, go up by 35%. Reading comprehension, 42%. And then we have a way that we measure sort of the community health. Part of what GoNoodle does is it tries to broaden the entry point. Not every kid is academic. You know, you might have a kid who's got a motor and just moves, but is a little socially awkward. Like we said, kids that are coming in from highly stressed environments, that are coming in with anger management issues, or just have trouble regulating their internal temperature. And movement is the equalizer in this. Giving an entry point oftentimes for kids who wouldn't otherwise have any other way to shine in a room, find a way to shine through this, which leads to social acceptance, which then leads to all the other conditions of creating community, which, if you believe Tal's books, leads to happiness. So, and I will say, it is incredibly hard to convince people to give us money for this. It's still right on the edge. Like, you know it, and yet, it is still hard to quantify the impact right now. Other than to say, the last 20 years have not exactly put us into the best state of being. So there must be a better way forward. We think that collectively, all of us here are telling you that there's a better path.
So Marty Seligman is the founder of the field of positive psychology. When he talks to educators and parents, asks two questions. He says, question number one, what would you most want for your children? And then he makes a list on the board, and what parents say, I want them to be happy, I want them to have good relationships, to be resilient, and healthy, and on and on. Then he said, okay, question number 2. What do children learn in school? And then he makes a list, and it's the 3 R's, history, geography, biology, and you name it. Hardly ever is there an overlap between the two lists. Now, it's not that the second list is not important. It's very important to teach the 3 R's. It's very important for kids to know their history. But why are schools ignoring the first list, especially, this is building on what Casey said, especially given that today we have the data to show that if you increase levels of well-being, if you cultivate better relationships, if you teach them healthier practices like movement or nutrition, they will also get better grades. They will remember more. They'll be more creative. They'll be more successful. And it's when you show, and again, this is why I think research is so important, not for its own sake, so that we can convince parents and policymakers to also, not only, but also teach well-being in schools. And again, the data today proves that it's a win-win. You get happier children, you get more successful in the traditional sense children.
I would like to take you with me in my pocket everywhere I go to talk. It's incredibly refreshing. I've got 14 million kids on Go Noodle's platform, which is great, but we need more of you in the world. You guys do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just walk behind him.
I think that, just to chime in on that list, is interesting in terms of what parents want, but yet we have this expectation, this culture of expectations on children that parents have put on their children that don't match what we're saying.
Because they actually believe that success will lead to happiness. Even if by their action, it seems like they believe it, and it won't.
And I just want to put it on a personal level is, the inner voice that you likely heard when you were a kid is the one that comes out when you're interacting with your children. So really it's an internal visit of what is my inner voice to myself? Is it a nurturing inner voice, or is it built on expectation and my not enoughness?
Right. No, thank you. We have a question here?
Yes, I have I don't know. I can speak loudly enough, I think. So I have 2 questions. One is about the measurement of wellness and how do we use that measurement within a pedagogy or within a learning environment. The second part is about using AI that can help, with the emotional wellness, the happiness part of the, like relationship, gratitude, and all that type of stuff, right? So the first question is that, why don't we even measure that in today's school environment? Do we want to measure whether kids are stressed or not stressed, whether they're engaged or disengaged, whether they are happy about the failure or frustrated by the failure, those type of stuff? Is there a good method that can give us some more quantitative data around that and use that within that environment, right? So that's really my first question to all the panelists. And the second part is that we're building AI to help teach kids, and we're using brainwave sensors. We're using subskin blood flow measurement, skin conductivity, just facial recognition of like eye gazing, tracking, and all that type of stuff, and try to understand when students are not focused or they're just tired or whatever, and try to get our coaches to help when they do that. But we want to see whether that's something that we do that kind of like more from a intuitive sense, but one of the things that we're lacking is that we really want to do that in a group sense, but we are doing, using AI, it's very personalized. It's very hard to integrate the group type of signals. Like, for example, when students are in a project-based learning environment, or when they're communicating between themselves or with the coaches, That is one area we want to see, what your guys suggestion and advice on how do we integrate that.
I guess I'll just say what we've found to be very practical is it's a lesson, and then every lesson is followed by a skills lab where you're practicing the work as a coach and as a client, or as a coach and as a patient. And so you're playing in both positions to build, both expertise and empathy for yourself. And so to put it towards children, it would be, how do we get children connecting in more meaningful ways with one another during classroom time?
Should I answer that? So we looked at a study that was published 2 years ago by the University of Pittsburgh by Dr. Brian Primack, who looked at the connection between increased social media use and perceived social isolation, PSI. And he basically showed that the more you use the bigger social networks, the more alone you perceive yourself to be, and the younger you are, the more alone you feel quicker. And what he did, he had 4 questions. He posed that to the people who were in his survey and then re-asked that question within 2 weeks. We did the same. The question was, in the past 7 days, how often have you felt isolated from others? And then we re-asked that question within 2 weeks, and we saw a reduction of 70%. And the reason was, you mentioned AI. What we do is we match people with other people who've been there. So there's been a lot of talk here about meaningful connections and community. What we try to do, and it would be fascinating to do it in a school environment because these are younger ages, is try and find the connections between the people who, if they'll develop a relationship, they would feel less alone and more socially supported. We try to do it with young adults, and we see the results.
One more piece of research I'm incredibly excited about, and it's not children-based, but it's Dean Ornish just put out his book Undo It, How Simple Life Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases. He's got 40 years of research backing it, and it's love more, stress less, eat better, all basic stuff. And so if it works for people, 40 years of research in older people and chronic disease, it's certainly going to be helpful to start that in with our children.
You can always study the brain. You can use everything from EEG to fMRIs. However, you can also draw on the research that was done using EEG and fMRI. And the research there, building on what Eric said, the research there shows is that when you have an activity and you repeat it over and over again, neural pathways are created or change. And this is the key. Small changes, repeated often and much. I spoke earlier about the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. There are also the 3 R's of change. And the 3 R's of change are reminder, repetition, and ritual. You want to bring about real change, lasting change, have reminders, have repetition, and create rituals.
Well, let me kind of chime in a little bit on that, just follow up on the 3 R's. Because I think that in our learning environment, most of the time we're focusing on the knowledge acquisition or the skill acquisition rather than the habit or character acquisition. Right? Because when we teach, we say, how do you get this knowledge point? How do you teach this understanding? But it's not really teaching habitual or character type of trait. And that is very, very difficult to teach because it doesn't happen, overnight. Right. Like when you say, I teach you this particular problem solving, you can learn it, you can merit it, you can then, build on top of that, which is very different pedagogy.
Correct.
Right. No, thank you. We're just out of time. I thought I'd end quickly on a quick lightning round to just end this session, but I know we could spend hours more. So I'm just going to quickly run through some quick fun questions and have you all answer very quickly. So name one teacher that had a big impact on your life. Name, grade, subject.
It was my physics teacher when I was in high school. He gave us the most difficult exams, but once they started, he left the classroom. and he trusted us to either, do it or cheat.
Miss Rotello, she taught Latin and Greek roots and the meaning of words.
I would say Mrs. Rogers was my typing teacher. That's how old I am. For without typing, I would be nothing.
You were, yeah.
Marva Collins. If you Google Marva Collins, you'll see she was a school teacher in inner city Chicago. She's the reason I chose to be a teacher.
Oh, wonderful.
Awesome.
Okay, one recent book or podcast you recommend?
One recent book I'm reading right now is Somatic Experiencing by Peter Levine.
I just completed How to Change Your Mind, which is the effects of LSD and psilocybin on the brain to change neuropathways and patterns, written by Michael Pollan, who wrote Omnivore's Dilemma. Incredible book.
It's great. I'll put out 100-year life about that we're going to be living to 100 years, and what does that mean in regards to continuous education and learning transitionary skills, since we're going to have multi-stage lives.
I'm going to go with something completely different, which is Homecoming, which is a podcast by Gimlet Media. It's a fiction podcast about what happens in this military base, and just was made out of a series in Amazon Prime. And since I'm a former writer, I'll go with fiction.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, last one. Sport or physical activity of choice?
Tennis.
Mountain biking.
Yoga.
Yoga.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much.